we were due to, when we were going to have the in-person conference in Norfolk, there would have been the opportunity for delegates to have been able to wander through DIS and explore some of the buildings for themselves. So this talk is just really a brief overview of DIS. What I'm going to cover are a brief overview of the origins and the evolution of DIS and the layout we see today, a summary of our investigations, and then a more detailed discussion on some key buildings of DIS. So just to give you an idea where DIS is located within Norfolk, you'll see at the bottom here, DIS is right on in the south of the county, on the borders with Suffolk. It's a small market town and it's built around a 6-acre mere. It lies within the heavy clay wood pasture region of South Norfolk. I'm going to have a prettier picture than just a map. In 1275, the market charter was reissued, and it's likely that the town was rebuilt around 1280 under the instruction of the Lord of the Manor, Robert Fitzwalter. During the 1400s to the early 1800s, hemp and linen and cloth weaving were the predominant industry in the town. In the early 19th century, the linen trade declined, but in its place, arable farming prospered. The coming of the railway to DIS in 1849 enabled it to thrive once again. In the 1960s, John Betjeman was an advocate for the town and fought to stop London overspill. He commented on the happy inconsequence of everything, the way old houses go well with less old ones. This aerial view highlights the triangular shape of the historic centre of DIS. I'll just move my cursor so you can see that there. As with many other towns, some of the medieval layout can still be seen, such as burgage plots running down to the mere. And later market infill. It's a layout that hasn't changed much over the last 400 years, as can be seen as we scroll through the following maps. Here we have the 1637 memorial map. Although the buildings on the map are representations only, we can see the infilling here of the centre of the market area, medieval market area, and the appearance of dividing narrow lane down the centre of the infilling called Drapers or Drapery Row. The main streets are clearly in place. I know it's sort of all here at the top here, but you can see this is St Nicholas Street. This is the street now called Market Hill, but known then as Corn Street. And we see an open market area here. Even in this respect, there are very remarkable similarities with the tide map of 200 years later. Slightly better, we can see it in a bit more detail here. And we've got these buildings, which are the market infill, and we can still see some of these sort of plots going down to the mere. We can also see that there's sort of yards and courtyards, which are on the earlier 1637 map, and we're just seeing more buildings concentrated in these. And then again, by the first edition OS map, again, that layout has changed very little over time. In 2014, the DIS Heritage Partnership, DIS Town Council, DIS Colne Hall and DIS Museum was successful in gaining funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund towards the refurbishment of the Corn Hall, an Arts and Heritage Centre, and to regenerate the area around it through streetscape remodification. The creation of a new wildlife garden and boardwalk on the mere. The aim of the partnership was to deliver economic regeneration of the commercial heart of DIS. Part of the HLF action plan was to carry out in-depth investigations into the buildings of the triangle. A solid body of archival research carried out by volunteers under the direction of the late Professor Alan Halkins produced an outline social and economic history of the market area from the late medieval period and set it within the wider context of the South Norfolk and Waveney Valley. Investigation into historic maps, the records of the local administration, the vestry, the manor, the local newspapers and historic photographs helped broaden this account. A team of volunteers carried out investigations into the buildings of the triangle from the summer of 2015 through to February 2017. The traders and landlords of the Triangle were extremely accommodating, and most were more than happy for us to investigate their buildings. Unfortunately, due to their commercial nature, carrying out detailed measured surveys proved impractical in many buildings. Stylistic dating through an external survey of the buildings in the Triangle, a more detailed internal inspection of 14 buildings, revealed that around 3/4 of the buildings had origins in the period 1550 to 1780, as shown, highlighted here in red on the map. And at least 6 were likely to have pre-1550 origins. The blue stars indicate the buildings which were investigated as part of the project. This corroborated evidence gathered from documentary sources such as the 1637 manorial map and indentures relating to individual buildings. We believe that this area of the market town developed from a triangular-shaped open market. The encroachment of permanent buildings into the triangular market area is likely to have begun in the late medieval period. The earliest buildings in the market infill area have been stylistically dated to the early 1500s. Highlights included the discovery of an open hall, possibly dating from early 15th century, and evidence of 17th century buildings, which appear to have developed from market stalls. And I'll be talking about these in more detail later in the talk. What proved most valuable to the project was the NHBG visit to the Triangle in the summer of 2016, with Tudor House and its arch-braced high green proving irresistible to NHBG members Susan and Michael Brown, who were extremely kind in giving up their time to assist the project. Recognition must also go to Lynn Hodges, Bill Jones and Ian Hinton for their help with measured surveys and advice. These investigations helped to inform the production of 3D computer models developed with UEA's Virtual Pass. These show the development of the Triangle through time. Obviously, for earlier periods, we have very few extant buildings, so a lot of this is conjecture. And I'd also like to caveat that there were limitations with time and budget, so don't look too closely at some of the details on these earlier maps models. But it does give the general idea of how it has sort of developed, and the amount of buildings have increased through time. So here we see the 1380 computer model. The church is in place then, and we suggest that this wasn't the open market area at this stage. We then have the 1520 computer model with the beginnings of market infill. And this building here, we know, is still in existence and stylistically dates at least to this period. And there's a number of other buildings which we'll be talking about later in this talk. This 1637 computer model is based on the manorial map. And interestingly, when the David Drinkwater, who was creating these 3D models, overlaid the 1637 map and the tithe map and then the OS map, many of the boundaries were still in the same positions. And then we just move on to the 1838. Again, it's looking a lot more crowded. We can see the refacing of these earlier buildings with more polite architectural features. And then again, 1880 3D computer model. Here we see the modern day view down St Nicholas Street towards St Mary's Church. The buildings of this share some similarities with those of nearby New Buckingham. The NHBG Journal number 2, which details the findings of the research of the group for that town, suggests that found that many of the buildings there were built in parallel to the street. And this is quite similar to this. We can see, I'm actually going to move on to this side, here with the jettied feature here. We also found within our sort of investigations, well, we didn't find, unfortunately, direct evidence of the buildings the medieval and early modern shops in the area. But these historic photographs sort of gave us glimpses of what potentially some of those sort of earlier features could have been. We've got here on the right this interesting building with the jetties stepping up the street. You might recall from that earlier slide, this is now all one property, and you can no longer see that from the front. So potentially these are actually much earlier medieval buildings than what we can see today. It's also likely that the majority of the late medieval shops, workshops, form part of domestic houses, with one bay forming the shop workshop and the two further bays incorporating the hall and the parlour. And I think this building here would be a good example of that. I'll now move on to a discussion of 7 key buildings which highlight the development of this part of Diss, and I'll be putting them in context with their location on the 1637 manorial map. Firstly, I'll talk about Tudor House, and this is 23 St Nicholas Street, and you can see that's just located here. It's in a prominent position at the convergence of Market Hill and St Nicholas Street. The Guild Chapel of St Nicholas, the patron saint of weavers, and amongst others, is reputed to have been located opposite, just here. And there are stunning examples of craftsmanship both externally and internally. Apologies, it's quite a dark slide. Interestingly, the earlier discussion on pantiles, this is one of the only buildings, or this range here, with plain clay peg tiles on it. And we believe it's one of the oldest secular buildings in the town. It's possible that its earliest plan form is of a lock-up shop here on this frontage, an open hall to the rear, and then possibly some service rooms as well to this side. These later wings come off at right angles from the open hall. There are also later 17th and 18th century additions to the rear as well. Oh, and I forgot to mention a cellar underneath, which, although now is accessed from the street, local memory suggests that actually historically this was accessed from the shop floor. Stunning dragon post depicts the Annunciation and the Nativity, and that's on that eastern range which is jutting out from the street. Moving inside now, the first floor of the north-south range reveals the earliest phase of the building, with this impressive arch brace principal tie beam of an open hall. Just see here, and there's this sort of mortise hole for the crown post. It was recorded here by Susan Brown in 2016. Part of our project, we were able to gain some funding from the VAG and also the Heritage Lottery Fund to instruct the entires to carry out dendrochronological analysis. Our team and Susan and Michael Brown worked together with the entires to identify buildings with suitable timbers for sampling. So Ian was able to take samples from here, from that the arch brace tie beam, and from a number of other locations within the building. You can see those here. And he was also able to take samples from another building, number 7, which I'll talk about later. Unfortunately, there was no consistent and reliable cross-matching between these samples and independent reference chronologies. What emerged from the investigation, the dendrochronology investigation, were the predominance of elm in late medieval and early modern buildings in Diss, as well as the use of young, fast-growing oak. Intriguing features of the two buildings, whose oak was sampled through this Tudor House and number 7, was that despite stylistically being more than 100 years apart, they were both found to contain timbers containing very marked periodic stress in their growth sequences. Ian Tyers suggests several reasons for this, with the most likely being that such features may be due to growing conditions being affected by changes in the water table or other environmental factors. Historically, elm was easily available in the Waveney Valley, where the water table would regularly fluctuate, and it is probable that it was also the source for the oak in these buildings. Okay, moving on, we can see the bottom of the brace on the ground floor looking up. We'll kind of quickly gloss over the fact that there's this awful 20th century insertion of a staircase. It's great to get that view. The reason why we feel that we've got the earlier open hall structure, dating from the early 15th century, is because of this inserted floor, this beautiful roll moulds there. Yeah, and let's gloss over the wiring too. But anyway, that's first floor, we can see that it was inserted here, and it cuts into that brace of that earlier tie beam. Into another detail of wiring, but also beautiful roll moulds. And then, if you recall from that first picture of 23 Tudor House, this is the range that we think might have been that sort of lock-up shop, and it's you can see this the dragon beam there as well. Just quickly, here's the rear of Tudor House, and internally we can see that there's a jetted part of it as well, but that's sort of now been enclosed by a later flat roof extension. And it looks like the chimney stack was a later insertion, possibly in the 17th century. You can see this is the detail of where that's the stack has been incorporated into that jetty, that rear jetty. Moving on to 18 Marketplace. Here we go. We can see again, this is another building that's prominent within the town, facing the church. And from the size, this prominent position and the size of the wall timbers, it's led to suggestions that it could originally have been built as a public building, possibly the Butter Market, as this alleyway here was known as the Butter Market alleyway. The attic hides a queen post roof structure from the 1520s, if not earlier, and that's in this range here. The southern wing here is a 17th century addition. In the 1901 and 1911 census, it's two buildings, a private house, most probably this section, and the shop on this side, and they were both in the same ownership. The chimneys of the building are all on the external walls, and it's likely that these are later additions. We also have a cellar here with trapdoors, which you can see internally. I'll just show you some shots. I mean, this slide just really shows how hard it was to sort of get some good images and survey these buildings. And you'll see just the sheer amount of things that are being stored as part of the commercial nature of the buildings. But again, this is up in the attic, some details of the bracing of the queen post roof structure and some of the scarf joints. Susan and Michael Brown pointing out the potential trapdoor that's coming from the floor above into the cellar. And interestingly, there's documentary evidence that this building was used as a butcher's since the 1830s. We've got this lovely little survival of a pargeted hare on the east elevation brick pier. And the building's currently undergoing refurbishment, so I'm hoping that I can get back in there and take some better shots of that sort of queen post roof structure. And also, as they've been refurbishing the building, they're sort of stripping back some of the later modern shop fittings and revealing sort of fireplaces and things as well. And just a quick shot there of the building sort of in the 1960s. We can see those sort of external chimneys there. And you can just see the top of this one, which is on the southern side of the building. and an impression of how the bottom market alley may have looked. Moving on to number 7, St Nicholas Street. I'm aware I'm running out of time, so actually I might just quickly go through these. This is located here, and then behind this 20th century shopfront extension, we've got a well, that was there before the 20th century, this element here, but we've got an early 17th century 2-cell timber framed building with a central stack now gone, but that's where it was located. I'll just quickly run through these. So we've got some lovely evidence of hollow mullioned windows, and then there we go, we've got some cranked wind braces, and there's another sort of, infilled window there, and these cranked wind braces are up at the top of the roof structure. These buildings here are really quite interesting because so we've moved on to 1 and 2 and 3 Marketplace. We believe that they were, this section in particular had origins as a market stall and then has developed over time. The unusually narrow footprint of the building, the fact that it abuts the churchyard, suggests that there could be a market stall. And here we go, so this is number 2, which is, we think that's the one of the 17th origins. Number 3, it's a new build, probably sort of early 19th century. And then from the rear, we can see up here, this is the fourth story, this window range here, which we think is an 18th century addition for a weaving loft. So that's linking in with this is linen and weaving industry. And we can see an internal shot of that here. And then finally, just 3 buildings which we didn't survey as part of the project, but we do have some survey reports of. They are or were public houses. So there's just this Dolphin House. We were talking earlier about the close studding, and that generally in Norfolk, a lot of timber frame buildings are rendered. This seems to sort of buck this slightly. Maybe it's that influence of North Suffolk coming in, and there we go, we've got some close studding there. And this is the building in the 1870s. We can just see it here, we can see it was thatched then. Some lovely examples of queen post roof structure that we can see, good survival. And then we've got the Sowson's Head. This, we believe, the NHBG carried out a survey in the early 2000s, or a very brief visit, and they think that it was actually built as an inn, with the earliest parts dating from 1550. And just got some of the sort of drawings of the roll moulded floor joists within the building, and some of the sort of 4-centered arched doorways. And a lovely shot of that sort of from the rear of the building, from the Victorian period. And then the Greyhound in here. There's a Norfolk Field Archaeology report compiled in 1982 while the building was being refurbished. Unfortunately, I've only managed to go in here to have a quick pint, and haven't been able to go up further and have a look. And from the description of the report in the 1980s, it doesn't look like much of what Edwin Rose is describing is still there. But what there is this lovely blocked-in doorway, which probably dates from the 1550s. So finally, in conclusion, Diss has remained relatively prosperous throughout its history. This prosperity did not lead to a significant programme of rebuilding in the centre of the town, as in other larger local market towns. There was also not a great fire in this area of the town, so no immediate need for rebuilding. Older buildings have been adapted and extended, either to meet the needs of the occupants or to keep up with the fashions of the time. In the 18th and 19th centuries, fenestration was updated and roofs heightened. Our investigations have revealed that there was a good survival of buildings with early 16th century origins, 100 years earlier than many of their listings suggest. This talk has only provided a brief overview of some of the buildings of Diss. As mentioned earlier, the commercial nature of the buildings provided limitations for our investigations, and I would be keen to revisit Tudor House and number 18 Marketplace, but also move into other streets such as Mere Street, where there are properties with 16th century characteristics. I'd also be keen to have a look at the half tax, the new published half tax for Norfolk, although I have a feeling from recollection that Alan Hawkins mentioned that there isn't any good survivals of the ones from Diss. Anyway, and two of the buildings I've discussed here have cream post roof structures. And in the NHBG Journal volume, Adam Longcroft discusses the research conducted by Lee Alston, amongst others, in Suffolk, which has revealed that there's a marked concentration of raised aisle and cream post roof structures on the northern central Claylands. Adam suggests that it's, or he says that it's now apparent that the Suffolk distribution of cream posts and raised aisle roofs continues northwards across the Waveney, and suggests that there was a Waveney Valley tradition, a common cultural background. I'd be really interested in following this up further as an area of research, exploring opportunities to investigate and map the occurrence of these roof structures in South Norfolk, along the Waveney Valley to Halston, and also those towns on the borders of Bungay and Beccles, which straddle it. So I leave you with these final words from John Betjeman from his 1964 BBC film, There's Something About Diss. Diss doesn't show itself at once. You have to go out and find the treasures. I hope this talk has inspired you to take heed of John Betjeman's words and go and discover Diss for yourself.